Okay, well, it's 9 o'clock, so we may as well get going. This is the first meeting that I'm taking, Tim Dietrich having passed on the baton to me. So we're going to start off first with Dana giving a short update on XDC. Dana has to rush off, so she's going to do her part now. So Dana, if you'd like to take over.
I would love to. Let me take over the screen share. So I wanted to just give a quick update about XDC. I think most of you know this now, but it's sold out. We're very excited to see the enthusiasm for doing this conference in Denver. We've gotten a lot of great feedback about the location. Also, we didn't have a conference in 2017, so we're trying to get back to that spring schedule. So I know a lot of people are really happy about the time frame. This actually, we had the most early registrations we've ever had for any XDC. So we know there was a lot of enthusiasm there, and we actually sold out before our second price increase, which we've never done before. We've only sold out one other XDC, and I think it was the week before the conference. So we're really excited. Just because you aren't able to register anymore, there's still opportunities to stay in touch with attendees, get major announcements that come out in the keynote or other places, and hear session information. So I just wanted to quickly run through what you can do if you're not attending. We are going to be very active on social media. You can often see me and Alyssa in the back of the keynote typing away, so we're making sure to keep everyone as updated as possible. We'll be posting on Facebook, and we're actually going to, for the first time, try the going live feature on Facebook. So Alyssa and I will take every opportunity we can to turn on that live feed and show you what's going on at the conference, so you can be a part of it too. We're going to be tweeting as much as we can, and if you have questions during the conference, you can reach us on Twitter very quickly. And then we started using Instagram. So if you're on Instagram, please follow us. We post there quite a bit, and we always are very active during XDC. Also, the Xojo blog is a great place to get XDC news and information. We'll have a post go up right after the keynote with all the information that's shared and any other things during the conference that you might need to know. And we'll also, as usual, we always put up a recap afterwards with lots of pictures and updates. So be sure to check there. Also, the XDC videos are going to be available again for this conference. We will record every session and the keynote and Q&As, and those will all be available right after the conference in May. They'll be available for sale for non-attendees, and all of the attendees will get them included with their registration. So that's a great place to, or they're a great package to have if you want to attend different sessions, but you're not able to attend this year. So definitely be on the lookout for announcements about that. And last thing to remember, it's always good to plan for next time. So so if you didn't get into this year's conference, mark your calendar for an announcement later this year about dates for 2019. So we'll definitely want to remind everyone to register early. You not only can save on registration because we do early pricing, but also you'll guarantee a spot because XDC is getting more popular. Does anyone have any questions? I don't see any popping up. Actually, Wayne, I don't have my mouse anymore. Can you take control back? Oh, there it is. Are you able to take control back, Wayne?
Yep.
Okay, great.
All right, thanks for that, Dana.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this section of the meeting has been traditional in the past. What's new with the community? We can see a few things. I've just leached these out of the announcements on the Xojo forum site, but if anybody wants to have anything included in this, please contact me in future. So there's some free course on timers from Javier. Tim Dietrich has released his AlloExpress 1.1. Monkey Bread software, as per usual, seem to come out with these new releases all the time. So Christian's been good at that. XDev magazine, I think that's bi-monthly, has come out. And just a few days ago, a new colour picker. So now I'm going to pass over to Susan, who's going to do her presentation. So Susan, if you want to ping the screen.
All right, guys. Hi. Good to see you. Or I guess not see, but hear you guys. All right. I am Susan Fenema. I am not a Xojo developer. I run Beyond the Chaos, and Beyond the Chaos does operational and project management system setup and actual project management for small companies, many software development companies. So a lot of this is very targeted to the software development world. All right, so let me tell you a little bit more about me since, you guys don't know me that well. I do participate in the forums. I have spoken at Xojo last year, and I will be there again this year. I am a non-technical, non-certified project manager, but I love technology. I adore it. I do everything in the technology way. I am a Texan, and I'm a Texas Aggie, class of '88. I am a home chef, and let me just tell you, as a project manager, if you do those types of events, you have a spreadsheet for it. So you get to actually project manage your hobby. So that's fun for me. Other people might think I'm insane, but I think it's a blast. I am the wife of a mechanic and the mother of 2 cats and a dog. And I am the daughter, sister, and best friend of small business owners. I'm a huge fan of small business. I worked in one large corporation. I couldn't stand it. I've always worked for small companies, and that's who I serve now too. And by small companies, I mean 1 to 5. The biggest company I work with right now is about 25 people. So enough about me. I'm going to address some of the problems that you guys are probably facing. I'm going to assume that many of you struggle with finishing your projects, that you probably have some problems managing scope, that you get pulled in a lot of different directions, you don't always know what to work on next, probably just answering the squeakiest wheel question, bouncing around a little bit. And I'm guessing, and I'd love to see in the chat, or I guess in the Q&A, if you can tell me as we go, and then I can try to tailor it a little bit, whether or not you work with some contractors or other team members, or if you have people to delegate to, or if you're just all one-person shops. That would help me a little bit in pointing some of my, presentation to you. I am sure that you all wish you had a way to keep things organized instead of stacks of paper or everything in email. And the bottom line comes down to, I want you to be running your business and projects. I don't want them to be running you and your life. So that's where we're going to get to. Let's solve the root problem. And just so you know, all businesses have the same challenges. This is not only software people, it's not only developers, it's everyone has the same issues. And many of the small businesses, like yourself, you don't want to add bureaucracy. You want to add some structure, but we don't want to add this layer of bureaucracy that makes things harder. We want to add structure that makes things a little bit easier. We want to be able to repeat successes, prevent disorganization. That kind of thing comes with structure. So let's talk about the basics. First is policy. That's going to be more for multi-person teams. You have processes and procedures, and then there's also project management then on top of that. So we're going to talk through those 3 things. So let's first talk about the difference between policy, process, and procedure. Policy are the rules. So if you are a one-person shop, you probably don't need a rule that says what time you open in the morning and what time you leave, and you know, what are the requirements to do your timesheet. those are the policies. They're just the rules that you follow. Now, if you even have one subcontractor that works with you, you should have some sort of basic policy. Just these are the days we're closed. These are the hours of operation, those types of things to help them understand the expectation of when they should be available. A process is a system. This is usually written. It's a document, and it's in prose. It's not exciting prose. It's not like you want to sit and read it as a book, but it's something that you can refer to figure out what the next step is. A procedure, on the other hand, is a checklist, just a straight up and down the list checklist. It might be, you know, how you install software, just one thing after the other. Another perfect example is an airplane pilot's checklist, the things that they go down the list every single time and check off so that they don't have to think about it and they don't have to forget or remember all of the specifics. This checklist lets them do it repeatedly over and over without much thought. So let's focus a little bit on process, because I think that that's where many of us fail in having a consistent way of doing things. First, with processes, why do you need them? Really, the key is to repeat your successes. Those things that you do well, you want to make sure you remember how you did it well so that you can do it again well. You know, the other is not reinventing the wheel, just like we were talking about with the procedure for the airplane pilot. If every single time you try to onboard a subcontractor, you have to remember everything they need access to, everything that you need from them, paperwork, all of that, it's harder. If you just have your list, if you have that process of how you're doing it, you can just go through and check it all off and not have to think about it. More importantly, think about offboarding that subcontractor. You know, when you're ready to cut them off, if you don't have a clear list of what to disable for them, that could be a bigger problem than, you know, what to enable. So those are important things in not reinventing the wheel. You waste a lot of time. And a lot of those things too are not done that often. You know, you maybe you do it once a year. It's really hard to remember what you did last year. And the other thing about processes is it lets you start delegating. And that is a big key. And one of the ways that I did this, I have a project manager that works for me. And one of the ways I wrote the processes for Beyond the Chaos was I did a Zoom meeting just like this with my new person. This is the very first time I'd ever done it. I talked her through the process. We then sent the recording off to have it transcribed, and then I already even had the words. It was real easy just to go through, edit that, and get it posted in a central location, and now she has something to refer back to. We have something that we agreed on as a way that she was going to do things for me. So that is a really good little cheat sheet way of getting some processes written down for yourselves. So what do I recommend as minimum processes for a small business? And that includes even one person. First, your sales process. And as far as sales, I mean from the point that you talk to them the first time to the point you get paid. You know, how do you navigate that? How do you make sure that you're following up, that you're not forgetting to touch them again when you didn't hear back from them? You know, part of sales is that your job is to get the answer from them, not just to ask the question. So you have to have a method of how to get that information back if they don't answer the first email you send. Invoicing and getting paid is important too. In my business, I have some fixed price projects, which I will send an invoice in advance for. I'm paid in advance. That's easy. But then I have others that are more project management oriented that are banks of hours. And so since there are multiple clients in that area, it would be really hard to just figure out when each client is out of hours and bill them. Instead, I have the process that every Tuesday, I check in on their hours and I see where they are, and if they're close, I bill them another one. So it's a repeating process instead of a one day maybe I'll figure out that they've already burned through the next bank without me billing them. Of course, projects. Without question, you need a project process. So with that, how do you open them? What is the general structure? What are the milestones that you're going to be following? And then also important, how do you close a project? It's important to remember that the goal is to deliver something to the client and to finish it. So that closing process might include things like asking for screenshots to put up on your website for use with other clients, asking for a testimonial or a referral, or making them aware of a referral policy you have to encourage them to refer you. In general, you look at all of these things and they're all big things, but the way to accomplish it is to do all the little things that make it up. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about writing a process, those little steps. All right, so project management tools. Now, if you heard me at Xojo last year, I'll say it again. I say this in pretty much every presentation I make. Email is not a project management tool. If you're using email, you're doing it wrong. Please stop. Make sure that you have some sort of a tool. And I don't care if it's something you've built or something off the shelf. Basecamp and Teamwork are very, very good tools. I know that many of you want to build your own, but your job is to build them for other people. Many times when we build our own, what happens is it never works right. It always has bugs. You never have time to finish it. It's 3 versions back. I could go on and on with all the things that I've seen with people trying to build their own custom solution. Basecamp and Teamwork work out of the box. They do the things you need. You don't need to reinvent the wheel on that. So those things, you have to add structure to them, and none of these are magic, right? You still have to actually project manage, but the tools give you the framework to work within. Another part of your project management toolkit is regularly scheduled status meetings. So if you are working actively on a new project, and in this case too, I'm not talking about ongoing maintenance where you're, doing bugs on a regular basis, or you have one-off little requests to fix. I'm talking about actually implementing a new solution. You would want to have regularly scheduled status meetings with those clients. And if it's very busy, if it's a very fast-paced, I'd say weekly minimum. And these are only half an hour. You're not spending hours and hours talking about technology in here. You're talking about where you are, what you need to accomplish, and what might be a stop from them, and get that information from them. The other key of status meetings is that it helps prevent interruptions. If your client knows that they're going to talk to you next week at 2 o'clock on Monday, then they might not pick up the phone on Friday and interrupt you. More than likely, they'll say, oh, I'm going to talk on Monday. That's great. So the other project management tool is your proposal. All of it starts from the proposal. How well you've scoped it, how well you've defined it, that you've put a time frame in it. All of those things are important to start at the very beginning, which is when you tell the client what the expectation should be. Okay, so let me give you a few tips on project management. In a solution like Basecamp or Teamwork, each client needs its own project. Now, might there be a subset of clients that needs access to something separate? Yes, of course. If you have a different department or a completely different solution that's being built for a different group of people, even though that might be the same client, it might logically need to be its own project. So it's not a hard and fast rule, it's a guideline. As most of these are, make them your own, use them the way that it works for you. Any to-do or task needs a date and a deadline. If you just put the list into Basecamp or Teamwork or Asana, any of the software out there, it's going to get lost. It needs a date and a deadline, and it also needs a person responsible for them. So those three, the date and the person, is what allows you to pull up a working list of what needs to be done and who needs to do it. Also, you can include milestones rather than setting deadlines for each task. So, back to my install the software on the server idea, you might have 10 steps for that, depending on what you're doing. You can just have the one milestone of the software will be installed by, March 31st. And then all of those other ones fall underneath it. That's fine, but make sure that has that milestone date. You can't drive a project without the dates. All you can do is hope it happens. So it's sort of like it's sort of like setting a New Year's resolution versus setting a goal. New Year's resolution is, hey, I want to lose 25 pounds. A goal is, I am going to lose 25 pounds by losing 2 pounds every month by going to the gym, by eating better. I'm going to cut back on fatty foods on the weekend. So those are actually steps, and you have a time frame to it, and a project works the same way. If you just have your tasks and no milestones and no timeline, you just have a hope that one day it might get finished. The other is that if you're struggling, you can get a professional like me, there are others, to build your structure and your template for you. This is not always a small business owner's thing, is the details. They like the big picture. They don't always like finishing. They like creating, and this is not always that creative. This is the down and dirty, get it done. If you don't have or know a professional or want to use one, consider using somebody you know is good at it. It might be a spouse. It could be a colleague. Maybe you can exchange that kind of work for each other to help you get set up and following up. So how do you set milestones? You want to start when the project is due and build backwards. Many times what you find out is when you do that, if you start at the due date and you build backwards, you might already be late. So make sure that you have allowed ample time in your proposal. Not a bad idea if you are putting that proposal out to kind of do a rough draft of your milestones before you send it out so that you do know you have time to do it. If you have not set a deadline, you can schedule forward. So if there is no set delivery date, you can schedule from the first step and move forward. And then you can see whether it turns out to be a realistic date. It's the other thing. Sometimes you're like, oh, well, that's next year, so I might have to tighten that up a little bit. It is important to set all of these because you push the project forward by having these deadlines. That is the other thing of having a status meeting with your client that also helps, is because you are obligated to show or talk to them, or at least feel badly that you didn't get anything done last week, every week, and that will help keep you on schedule. The other thing is to make sure that if something happens to affect the deadline, that you communicate in advance with your client. So if you run into a technology challenge, or if as something happened to one of my clients, they had appendicitis, they had to go to the hospital. You want to make sure that you're saying, hey, listen, maybe after you get out of the hospital, you might tell them, hey, listen, I've been in the hospital, I'm late. This is not going to happen. We're going to have to reschedule. I need another week. As long as you're telling your client in advance, they're usually very good about understanding the situation. But if you just show up on the day it's due and say, oh yeah, I had appendicitis in the middle of this and I didn't get it done, they're gonna not be quite as accommodating. So make sure that you're doing it as in advance or as immediately thereafter as possible. As part of your milestone setting, you'll include every major step that you can think of. You've done this before. You know the steps. Put them all in there. Share the schedule with your client when you start. That keeps you both on track. It also gives you the ability to modify that schedule at the beginning versus the clients, and if you have team members, their schedules. So if you are ready for the client to test on June 1st, and they're like, oh yeah, my child's graduating May 31st, and June 1st we're leaving for a month to take them to Spain, you might not be able to meet your schedule. So having that ability to have that conversation with the client when you start the project will help you adjust it as need be to accommodate any of those things that might come up. Okay, so we have it all set out. It's all line itemed out. And guess what? Changes, they happen every time, right? So I can do a whole hour on changes. I'm not going to do a whole hour on changes. I'm just going to give you the gist here. First, don't let them get you off track. You did discovery. You did a proposal. You guys worked together for a long time on what they needed. And the little changes that come up in the middle are very exciting for a developer oftentimes because it's, oh yeah, I could totally do that and it'd be so cool. But that's going to get you off track. You'll burn through their hours if you're billing by the hour. You'll eat into your profit if you're billing by a fixed price. Just be very careful with those changes. Learn to say no. It's hard, but you can. Thing to remember too, I think a lot of times we want to serve our client by doing what they're asking. But remember this, an undelivered project has absolutely no value to the client. So if you're constantly being sidetracked, you're not going to deliver them the solution that gives them the value. You're the service professional, and it's your obligation to keep the client held to that original scope so that they can get the value that they expected in the beginning. Remember that this is, software is your job, but you're just making a tool for them to do theirs. So sometimes you have to calm them down too, because they get excited and they start dreaming, and you want them to dream about what you could create. But until they have something in front of them that they can use to do their job better, the solution has no value to them at all. So always fulfill the scope that you decided first, and then come back and address the changes. I'll give you some ways to make sure that you capture those too. Stop and talk about any dramatic change. Now, if all of a sudden it changes the whole outlook of the solution, yes, you have to stop and talk about that. And you might then have to requote the job. You might have to give them a new timeline. You might have to, tell them that you can't even do it anymore. Who knows? Maybe there's something that now has been brought up that the software can't solve, or you don't have the experience to solve. You might have to bring in other people. That's a delay. That's more money, all of those things. So if something dramatic happens, stop and reset. And also, as mentioned with the appendicitis, also consider issues that are beyond your control. We had fires in California this past year, and we had hurricanes in Houston and in Florida. And those things they stop the people's lives if you're working with them. So when you're working on timelines and you're waiting on them and something like that has come up, you're going to have to redo the schedule, regroup when it comes back, and reset. Part of all of this is setting the client expectations. I know that in dealing with changes, it's hard to remember that you're serving them. And sometimes it's scary, right? It's scary to say no. It's scary to have that conflict. But don't think of it as conflict. It's very simple. The scope is the scope. You wrote it down. You have a project tool that demonstrates it. That's straightforward. That's not emotional. It's the scope's the scope. The timeline is based on the scope. So you built your timeline based on the scope that you agreed to. If one of those changes, the timeline or the scope, it's going to affect the other. Any of these changes affect the price. Whether it's if you bill by the hour, if it's the number of hours that you're putting in, or if you're on a fixed price and you're adding scope to it, then they don't need to get stuff for free. If you're trying to do it faster, they don't necessarily need that as part of the free price either. And even if they do things slower, it will just eat up your time. You want that timeline to be reflective in the price as well. It is very important that you have clear communication with consequences to your client. These are my 4 C's, and I think that they're really important. It gives you the ability to say, hey, listen, if I don't hear back from you on Friday, this project's going to be delayed. Now, if the project's delayed another week, you can even come back and say, hey, listen, I know you're busy. I know you're struggling with some things and you can't get to me right now. But if I don't hear back from you within another week, it is going to take me more time to get back into this solution, which is going to cost you more money. You can say some things like that so that the client is clear and they're making the decision. They can still make the decision of, we are having way too many things going on at our company right now. We're going to hold, and that's okay. I will pay more for it later. But if you don't tell them that up front, then they're going to be like, why does this cost more? You're like, well, because it took me 3 more hours to figure out where I even was, since it was a month later when you heard back from me. Well, they're not going to respond to that as well as, again, like we spoke about before, is if you tell them in advance. The other is to give them a way to dream, and this is the wish list. This is what I was talking about when you're saying no to the little things. Capture it. Make a list on your software, Basecamp, Teamwork, any of those, your project management software, of a place where the clients can actually dream. This is little changes. It's big things. It's a whole new module. It's all of those. Here are the results of using that wish list. Your next project can be built off the wish list. So you can group those things and make a change order as an individual group of tasks. You can also say, oh, there's a whole bunch of little things. I'm going to make a change bucket. This might be like a retainer or a bank of hours, but money on deposit with you. This is money paid in advance, which kind of buys your time and attention, so that when they do come up with the little things that they want fixed, that you're a lot more apt to, oh yeah, that's 15 minutes. I'll just take it out of your bank or your bucket or your retainer, and I'll knock that out for you right away. If you have to figure out how to bill for it after the fact, it sometimes just doesn't get billed. Those types of change buckets or retainers, that is a great long-term support option for people after you've actually put together their initial project. But that wish list is where they can track all of these and decide which ones they want to do and when they want to do them. And then you can figure out how to get them paid for after the fact. So more money, more money, more money. That's always good. All of this requires you project managing yourself. Part of what I often recommend is making sure that you create a project for your business, that you have tasks that you can remember and assign to yourself, that you can remember that you want to write a blog post every 2 weeks. You know, make something of yourself for yourself to manage you and your business. You can keep your operations tasks there with any due dates and assigned to you or your team members. The other thing is to block out time on your calendar. I'm a big proponent of time blocking. If you want to develop uninterrupted, put 3 hours on your calendar. That's development time, or 4 or 8, however many you want, and block it out. And now when somebody tries to call you, you are in a meeting. It is a meeting with yourself, but it's a lot, mentally, it's a lot easier to say, no, I'm in a meeting. I'll let the phone ring. I'll check email later. No, I'm not going to take a meeting that day. You know, this is what I'm focusing on. Another tip is at the end of each day, not in the morning, and I'll tell you the psychology of that, but at the end of each day, look at what is on your list to accomplish versus your calendar. And be realistic. You know, you can't finish everything. If something has to give, figure out what's the priority. If you do this at the end of the day, the psychology is that in the morning, you're starting with a plan instead of spending your morning figuring out your plan. So when you're fresh and ready to go, you know what your main number one thing to do is. So that is in general project management. I mean, there's a lot more to it, but those are the top tips I can share with you. I will tell you, I am giving a special offer, and this is going to run through Xojo. If anybody is interested in custom templates for your business or a process package, I'll give you a free month of coaching and support with a purchase of one. And there's just that code, Xojo 2018. It'll run through the conference and through the end of June. And I am happy to take any questions. I don't see any right now, but happy to take some. All right, I don't see any coming in, but you know, holler at me if you need me. And Wayne, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for that, Susan. It's well worthwhile. Let me share my screen again. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is a little presentation on debugging service applications built with Windows service applications built with Xojo. And I'll just show you why you need to actually debug in the service space. So first of all, we need to run Xojo up as administrator. And that's because of security partitioning. The service won't be able to talk back to Xojo for debugging. And you have to do the same thing if you're running this in Visual Studio. So now for this, I've got this little service application, and as all it does is output the time to the debug log. So if I just run this, get this nice black screen here, and we can see every second it's outputting the time to the debug log. So I'll just kill that. To run it in as a service, I'm going to run it paused, and I've built an application that helps me do that, which is called the Xojo Service Debug Launcher, which again needs to run in as administrator. Now this program is built in Xojo, 17R3 in fact, same as this I'm running here, and it is what made it possible was the ability to set the manifest for requiring administrative access. So I'm just going to create and start the service now. We can see here it's just doing, all it's doing is outputting SC commands to a shell and displaying the response in this list box. So we can see here we're creating the service, which is just the application name with underscores instead of spaces, and the path to the application. And if we come back to Xojo, we can see that the service is running. Now I can either kill that by clicking on here, or I can stop it in the application by hitting the stop button. So I'm going to now show you some of the differences that we see between the two systems. So in our run method, I'm just going to turn off the clock so that we can see the startup. And if I run this again in here, we can see the application starting, and we can see these arguments here. We've got 2 arguments and they're duplicated. It's not going to be the same if we run them as a service. So if I start that now, and we go back to Xojo, we can see now that arg0 is the path to the binary. args1 is now the service name. So there's an initial difference that we need to watch out for. Now we can also pass these arguments to our service. Now I can show you how that works in console mode here by putting in command line argument. And if I run that, we can see again they're duplicated. But when we run as a service, now let me get that window open. There are 2 ways of passing arguments to a service. One is to embed them in the service definition, which is the permanent way. So if I do that, you can now see that the binary path now has the parameter embedded in it. So it's part of the service, and every time the service starts, it will have that parameter. And if we come back here, now we can see that our service name is now args2, and the permanent parameters is nestled in between 0 and 2. We can also set a temporary parameter. Now the temporary parameter, which you can't test in console mode, the temporary parameter actually is part of the start command. So next time we start it, we won't have that second parameter. And if we have a look in Xojo, it's actually come after the service name. So if you're going to accept arguments into your application, you really need to use key value pairs. At design time, we won't know what the service name is going to be. So we won't be able to filter it out. So that's the first thing you've got to watch out for. If your application is going to accept arguments, then you need to use key value pairs. Now, in Windows, we also have the option to pause, resume, and stop the service. And it's up to us as developers to decide how we're going to honor that request from the operating system to perform these functions. In this case, it's quite simple, because all I'm doing is setting paused to true, and that will stop the clock. And when I resume, it will start again. That happens because paused is a computed property, and when I set it, I'm toggling the clock based on the value of paused. So to demonstrate that, we'll just run it up as a project. Of course, this is impossible to test in console mode because you can't pause a console application. So at the moment, we should be all running. Look in Xojo. Let me just turn the clock on again so that we can see what happens. Okay, fire it up. We should see the time clock is ticking now. If I pause that, just simply outputting a pause command, come back, says it's paused, the clock stopped. Click the go button again. This time we're running an SC continue, and clock starts. So if we're doing a complex task in our service, Simple way to implement that is to put the task in a thread and then pause and resume the thread. If you're listening for, if you have, say, a server socket with, you're listening for TCP connections, you can stop the server socket from listening and maybe clean up by closing the any existing connections. The other thing we have is the stop. Now this is this is where you do all your cleanup, close your database connections, stop listening, and so forth. At the end of this request, the application will be quit. It'll be stopped. And just as a hint, don't put a quit command in here because that will actually show up as an error. The service manager will complain about it being in error. So coming down here, at the end of this process, of end of startup, I'm running an event loop. Because all that does is keep the program running and allow Xojo to check for the timer needs to be actioned, or the stop command, the stop event needs to be handled. So you need to keep that in there to make that work. And really, that is the extent of my demo. So I don't know if there's any questions anybody's got. No questions? Hope everybody heard me. Okay, that really concludes today's meeting. Okay, so Juiced has said great tool. Yes, it makes life a lot simpler to do. The project itself and including all of the source will be posted on GitHub. I'll put that in as part of the, once I get this video up on the website, I'll put a link to that as well. So the project source for the launcher will all be up there. And I think that probably answers your question as well, Christian. I mean, I can put this test app and demonstration app up as well, I suppose. It's pretty simple though. Last thing I wanted to show was how Microsoft do it. So this is if you're running Visual Studio, how to debug your service. You've got to go through all of those processes. Build and debug, okay, we've done that. Installed the service, well, that's been done by the helper. You need to then start it. Start Visual Studio with administrative credentials, the same as we did. Then you've got to go and find the process and attach it. Wait a minute, the process has already started and running. So how do you debug the startup? You have to put all sorts of delays and stuff in there to make it work. And then you've got to be careful that you don't delay too long because the service has to start and it won't start if you take more than 30 seconds to figure out what you're doing with that. So, Juiced, you're saying, would like to know more about services on Windows Server. Basically, a service on a Windows Server is a console application that is running in a secure space. Can I post this link here? I'm assuming you're talking about this link. I can post that. I will post that on the site, the vzug.org site afterwards as well, so that you can have a look at that. Okay. Right, so that's really the end of this meeting. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I will let you all know when I have the recording up on the website. Thank you all for your time.
Thanks, Wayne, for having me. I had a great time.
Yeah, it's
bye,
been
guys.
good. Thanks for coming.